Hey, everybody, and welcome to Where Are They Now with Aortic Hope. Where Are They Now is a new initiative that is geared towards sharing updates from prior individuals that shared their stories with us in our Survivor series. I am your host, Greg Aaron Greenberg, and joining us today is Marfan patient and dissection survivor, Jessica Sosa. Now, you guys all know her in the community probably better as just Sosa. So we will welcome Sosa, and thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
Hi, thank you, Greg, for that introduction. We were just talking about what name to use. So yes, I am Sosa. Nice to meet everyone.
It's good to have you, Sosa. So briefly, I mean, we covered it, obviously, the Survivor Series for us that was a little more in depth way back when. But quickly tell us a little bit about your initial diagnosis, especially with Marfan, and how that presented, because you're a little bit of a rarity where stuff went on very young for you, aortic wise.
Yeah, so I, as a child, of the physical characteristics that you can use to clinically diagnose Marfan patients. And a little bit of a family history where my father had a sudden death at a young age. And I was born with dislocated lenses in my eyes, and so that's how the surveillance started. And then we kind of just were put on a 6-month to yearly echocardiogram surveillance from that point on. And then at 9 years old is when they found a defect in my atrial septal valve in my heart, and or not valve, just the atrial septal portion of my heart. And at the same time, I had the aneurysm in the ascending aorta. So at that point, we had the first aortic and open heart surgery.
Okay, so that's early. So that's very unique. Now advancing that, because I mean it's a unique perspective as a child, obviously, to go through that, but everything's fine for years. Now you get towards adulthood. How does it progress with your aorta then, and what does it end up becoming future-wise surgery for you?
Right. So in between there, I've had numerous surgeries. I think I'm up to 22 at this point, but none of them were vascular related. And so, like you said, I was going through adolescence and my younger years free and clear. But I still was on surveillance. So I was still on a yearly echo at that point. We hadn't really moved on to any of the higher resonance imaging with MRIs or CTs or anything like that. And so the way it came about was actually a little unique because in my mid-30s, I was interested in getting a definitive genetic diagnosis with the Marfan syndrome because I hadn't been genetically tested. And so I was looking into getting that done and just, solidifying that that is in fact what's going on. And yes, it came back that I do have Marfan's. So then from there, we just kind of started doing, my medical team were just kind of looking at things a little bit more in depth. And then that's when they noticed that the arch of my aorta was starting to aneurysm. And we were watching that and just taking the measurements and seeing where we were with that. That was the first time for me since I was a child, which at that point you don't really appreciate, the severity of the issue. But that was the first time for me where I just experienced, anxiety and panic and that type of thing, because when you're having these discussions with your medical team, they're throwing out words like catastrophic and, detrimental and all these things that are just so scary. And so that at that point was when I reached out to you guys, to Aortic Hope, and was just encouraged to find support through other people that have gone through similar situations. We were still watching it, and then it got to a size, it reached 4.7, I believe, where they decided to go ahead and repair the aortic arch. So in 2018, we had that was my second open heart procedure, and they just did a aortic arch replacement at that point. Recovered from that, totally different recovery than I remember as a kid, and did not come out of that unscathed. Had some post-operative issues, but nothing that deterred me from coming home or any of that. So came home. That was in like July or something. Came home, was recovering well. October came around, and I was feeling great, for the most part. And I was outside taking pictures of butterflies, and all of a sudden I felt this pain in the middle of my shoulder blades. And it was like a pop. Like I heard a little bit of a pop, and then I felt this pain, but it wasn't a severe pain, and everybody who I've talked to before that had always told me, oh, you'll know if you dissect because it's the worst pain in your life and whatnot. And I guess that's a good example of how different it can be for everybody. And for me, it was more like a progressional pain. It wasn't like an instant unbearable pain, but it was like a little bit of pain and then kind of a little bit more and a little bit more. And as time went on, I was ignoring it because I thought I was eating a lot throughout the day. So I thought it was like indigestion or something. And then as a little bit of time went on, I noticed that I was having trouble breathing, difficulty breathing. And then my skin was getting clammy. And at that point, I knew that, I potentially had an emergency situation. So my friend drove me to the hospital, which is mistake number one. If you ever are suspicious that you're having an aortic emergency, please call 911 and have an ambulance take you. Because I walked into the hospital, to the ER, they did not see me as a serious case, even after I told them that I had surgery 3 months prior. And because I was saying the pain was in my back, they weren't putting two and two together. And so they put me on a gurney, and I waited and I waited and I waited and I waited. So they never actually took me back until, luckily I was there with a friend. So they never actually took me back until my friend complained and said, she's getting progressively worse. My ECG that they perform when you first come in was normal. So they didn't associate it with the heart or anything. So after she complained, the response was, oh, we're going to get you back there as soon as we can. We have people back there that are more severe than you are. And we could do nothing but, say, okay. And so then we waited another maybe 20 minutes or so. And then at that point, I told her, I don't know how much more of this I can take, because at that point, then the pain had definitely gotten a little unbearable. And so then, another complaint happened. The ER doctor finally came to my gurney, and I gave him the history. He took me back to CT at that point, and they scanned me from my neck down to the middle of my chest. And then once they were pulling me out of the CT scanner, they put me back in and scanned me from my chest down to my pelvis. And that's when I knew they found something, because they wouldn't put you back in and keep looking. So then when they pulled me back out, he approached me, and he said, at that point, he told me that I had a dissection from the suture line of the arch repair down to my left iliac artery. And at that point, all the nurses came, and that's when IVs were being put in, and pain control was going in. Hallucinations were happening at that point because I had so many pain meds. And Life Flight was called to pick me up from that hospital and take me to Johns Hopkins. So then, they were able to stabilize the dissection. They left me there for 72 hours, and then they do another CAT scan just to see where it's at. And so once they figured it was stable, they knew that I didn't have to go into surgery right then. We all had a little bit of time. So I went home, and then in December, we scheduled the third surgery. The plan was to repair the descending down all the way down to the left iliac, but they could only get it repaired from descending down to the diaphragm, which is what separates your chest from your abdomen. And they couldn't go any further because the aorta is so close to the spinal cord, especially as it's going further down in your body. And they had lost neurological signal to my legs. And so if they would have continued, I could have been faced with paralysis, whether temporary or permanent. So they opted to stop, and I thanked them for that. And I went home and recovered from that one. That was the third and the last one in 2018. And since then, recovery for both of those as an adult were a lot more difficult than I was anticipating, and longer than I was hoping for. And even now, like I was telling you, Greg, coming up the stairs to do this interview, I was winded, and it's still just a constant fatigue, battle and that kind of thing. So, but I did have some issues after that as far as like pleural effusion. I had a clot in my arm that they needed to repair. They had to put a stent in my right iliac artery because the false lumen of the dissection was blocking the blood flow to that leg. So there were a couple hiccups along the way that we had to address. But all in all, I'm here now, and I feel grateful and I feel good, except for being winded going up the stairs. But yeah, I know that I'm not clear and free because I still have a dissected aorta, but it is stable at this point, and we are watching it, and I am taking my meds, and we're doing the best we can.
And now you're just like the rest of us, managing this chronic illness.
Yep.
Like you said, sometimes you'll get winded from something. There'll be good days, bad days,
right,
and everything in between. Now, did they send you to any sort of cardiac rehab or PT post these surgeries as an adult?
Yes. Every time they sent me home, I had a home PT service coming twice a week. But I was a bad patient, I got to tell you, because when they were here, I was doing everything they told me to do. I had no choice. And then they leave and they give you a set of instructions, and they tell you, we expect that you do this exercise twice a day, take a walk around the block twice a day, and I nod my head and say, yes, I'm going to do it, and God bless my mom, because she was here, staying on top of me and trying to get me to actually adhere to these recommendations. And I gave her such a hard time, and I didn't do nearly as well, when they weren't here than when they were here. But I was frustrated, like when you're going through recovery from such a large traumatic event, you are thinking that you're going to be able to at least close enough do the things that you were able to do before. And simple things like just washing my hair, that was draining, and so that was really frustrating, because I would come out from a shower and literally lay on my bed and stay there for an hour before I could feel energized enough to get back up and do something. So I wasn't the most pleasant patient to be around.
And it's beyond physical, because it becomes mentally defeating. I can't believe, like you said, I can't believe something as simple as washing my hair just knocked everything out of me for an hour.
Right. So I would walk around with grease ball head on purpose, because I would go and shower, and I would stretch the hair washing as long as I could.
Now, you had said that, obviously there were some much different challenges as an adult versus as a child. Did you really feel like PTSD had kicked in, especially with not so much obviously obviously there was anxiety for what you were prepared for, but that
Mhm.
emergency one to then come months later,
Yeah.
is that like, do you have a PTSD left over from experiencing that emergency event?
I'm not sure. Like I can't definitively say that I do. But then I also wonder if I'm just, uh, keeping that emotion tucked away somewhere, or if something else kicked in to protect me from that or whatnot. But I don't have any negative responses to the hospital or um, medical equipment, any of that stuff. I had just having Marfan syndrome, you kind of grow up in the hospital system, so that might play a role into it. I can tell you I had more anxiety just kind of waiting, initially when they first discovered the arch aneurysm and we were watching it and we knew we were going to go at some point, but we didn't know when. I had never experienced anxiety like that in my life, and I love sleep. I love sleeping. And I've never experienced an event where it literally robbed you of your sleep, and I would, my body would just be so tired that I would eventually fall asleep. But then shortly after, I would jolt awake just from the panic and just from the anxiety. And that lasted about 3 months, but I was borderline, considering approaching my medical team about any kind of medication that they could give me to assist with that. I didn't have to go that route, but I haven't experienced anything like that since. So I don't know if I've gone through the 5 stages of grief and I'm just in the acceptance phase or what that is, but I can't say that I have any particular events that cause negative emotions in me.
Right. Yeah, no, I'd say for me, it's more relived. There are people that ranges
Yeah.
wide variety. We know people in the community that
Right.
hear a helicopter and were
Right.
airlifted and it's enough to trigger them, or an ambulance drives by and suddenly they white knuckle their steering wheel a little bit. I
Right.
was never that sight or sound
Mhm.
person. For me,
Yeah.
it was nightmares and would wake in panic sweat.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting that I went through that before actually having gone through the actual traumatic event, and then maybe that prepared me, I don't know, in some way, to where having experienced the actual traumatic event, I was beyond that point already for some reason. In
yeah,
fact,
I think as a Marfan patient, I think that your watch and wait is very different than just the uh random like watch and wait intact aneurysm person.
mhm,
Because with the Marfan, there really is that idea that on a drop of a hat,
yeah,
this can go. Whether I'm monitored or not,
right,
it can happen in Marfan patients. It doesn't really happen in the regular intact non-connective tissue disorder crowd.
right.
Most of the time, if you know about it, you'll get to your nice planned surgery and everything will be okay. That's not necessarily true for people that are connective tissue. They can still have the
Right.
event out of nowhere, even being monitored.
And I think that's what set off the anxiety, because I literally was convinced that every time I went to sleep could be the time that I go, and so that was what I had to struggle with, and it was a very unpleasant part of my life. Luckily, it didn't last very long. And like I said, by the time I got in that helicopter, I'll tell you, it was a combination of being drugged and a little bit of the preparatory prior to that, hearing everybody's stories and that kind of thing, but mostly being drugged. But when I got to the helicopter, the first thing I told the flight nurse was, because all I had was my cell phone on me, and the first thing I told her was, as she was already putting me in, I said, "Oh, can you pull me back out so I can get a selfie with the helicopter?" And she said, "I think you have bigger things to worry about." And I was sad, like it really hurt my feelings, but I think it was the effects of the narcotics. And when I got in the helicopter, all I could think about was how mean she was to me.
I remember you telling me about that when everything was fine and clear and that, and
Yeah.
you're like, I have to tell you, this woman wouldn't let me take a picture in the helicopter.
Yeah, I was so heartbroken because when is that going to happen again, you know? But then the next day when drugs make their way through your system, you start thinking differently.
Yeah, and I think that things. I mean, you had brought it up. You were a member of this community
Yes,
way before you experienced an emergency.
right.
So,
I
through
I
talking
had
to a lot of
twice.
us, you
Yeah.
had heard absolute horror stories. If yours doesn't quite get there, you're already kind of feel in the positive, but you
Mhm.
also knew how many of us came out of it.
Right. Yeah. And I do. I really think that a lot of that, because your medical team tells you what they anecdotal information that they hear from other people, but it's different when you're hearing it from people who actually went through it. And even though my exact circumstances were different, and even the experience itself was slightly different from others' experience, I still felt that I was somehow prepared, overall. So,
That's awesome. I mean, not that it happened, but
right,
that you had a feeling of being prepared for where it was going.
right.
Um, okay, well, we made jokes about sometimes forgetting words, so I'll ask you this one. Do you experience the prototypical pump head?
Yes, it's terrible. It is so terrible. In fact, I think that's one of my biggest struggles with recovery because especially in a professional setting, I shy away now. I used to be so much more outgoing, shocker. But I used to be so much more outgoing, and now I feel like I shy away from certain conversations because I forget words. And I know what I'm trying to say, but I just can't articulate it. Um, and sometimes it'll be in the middle of a conversation where I just go blank, and it's so awkward. And my fear is that the person I'm speaking with is just going to think, what's wrong with this person, um, or what happened to her, because I used to be able to express myself so much more openly and freely and more confidently. And now I find that I do struggle with memory and with just trying to communicate, accurately and clearly. So I didn't know that that was a potential consequence from having these procedures, and it makes sense when you think about um, the process that they actually put your body through, to correct this and to repair. They have to cool your body down to ungodly temperatures. Your brain is essentially put on ice while a machine is circulating your blood throughout the rest of your body. And you're under for a long period of time under anesthesia. So, it makes sense that you don't walk away completely unscathed. But I wasn't prepared to feel like like it affected my personality. Um, and I feel like that's how I've experienced it.
All right. Do you have any tricks or anything that you've used to try to improve your memory, or you
I
just kind of accept?
Yeah. I feel like I have some games on my phone that you play on a daily basis, and the more you play, the more it kind of tells you what your progress is and stuff. Um, but I didn't commit to it. So I play it, whenever I'm bored or whenever I feel like I want some mental stimulation, and it works on that aspect. But I can't positively say that it's had any effect. But also, it could be because I haven't really stuck to it. But there is also a little bit of acceptance, as far as like, well, how much of this realistically is going to be impacted, by anything that I do.
Right. I think you get to a point also where you're like, okay, this is the hand that's been dealt.
It's my
I
new normal,
Yes.
essentially.
Oh,
Right.
I hate normal. New reality. There's nothing normal about what we go through at all.
Right. Exactly.
Um, but yes, I get it. I just hate that phrase.
Mhm.
But exactly, I think you get to the point where you're like, okay, I just got to come out. Like for me, it's focus.
Right.
I find I was never an ADHD type of person, and
Yeah.
now suddenly I can lose focus in a
Oh,
second on what I'm doing. And it's not like it's not I walked into a room and forgot why I went there. I mean, that obviously has happened, obviously, both with age and probably a little bit with this, but it's in the middle of doing something and
mhm.
then just gone, train of thought.
Yeah.
With doing a lot of these interviews, I never had a problem speech wise.
Mhm.
Now I noticed that we joke about it that I can fall into an cycle
Mhm.
because I'm spinning my wheels in my head
Right.
trying to get the idea that I
That,
have to come out.
that's exactly what I experience. It's there, and I know what I'm trying to say, but it is just, and it's like a block. Like I can't even push it out.
I feel like I drive around the block
Hmm.
to get to another word that I
Yeah.
can substitute in because I
Right.
can't find the right word that I want to use in the sentence.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
have to rejigger everything
Right.
and now start using synonyms
Right. And
that
it,
don't quite fit correctly.
and for me, my experience with that is like I feel like I have regressed back in age, and in communication skills, and that has been the most noticeable because, when I talk to people about it, close friends or family members, they tell me they don't notice anything. But I also think that people are trying to be kind, and they're trying to be positive, and they're trying, to get your mind off of it and that thing. But we all know ourselves better than anybody else, and when there's something different, and when you're not necessarily reaching your fullest capacity, but you used to be. So that's a little bit difficult because I don't, as a professional, I don't want people to judge me on that, and people do and will, especially in the workforce. So
Okay, well, normally this would be the time I'd ask a question about your first aortiversary, but I'm assuming that it was not the same thing for you as a child, but let's address the adult instances of surgery and events. Um, do you celebrate your aortiversary? Is it a big deal to you?
so I do internally, but nobody in my circle, um, outside from aortichope, but nobody in my daily circle, I feel like they are there. It's avoidance behavior, like we don't talk about the thing that was bad, and we don't talk about the thing that was traumatic. We don't bring it up, and it may be because they are concerned about how my reaction is going to be. Um, and even though I am very much an open book and I freely talk about, my experiences to anyone who's interested in listening, I think natural human nature is to shy away from bringing those type of things up, or it's taboo, or those things.
I can understand it. Nobody wants to be the person to pour salt into a wound.
Right. And even my family, they don't bring it up. Even when I openly talk about it, I don't get a lot of questions asked, and I don't get a lot of like interest, at least, in conversation. And I think they're just letting me kind of get it off my chest and, change the subject and move on kind of thing. So for me, it's in my calendar because pump head. But for me, it's something I don't want to forget, and I want to be reminded of, and I want to celebrate whenever I do reach those milestones because, unless you go through it yourself, which you have, you get to really appreciate opening your eyes the next day and being here and whatever challenges we have to face that day, because obviously Marfan syndrome has its own challenges on a daily basis, but I still get to do them, and I still count the fact that I can, I can continue to live my life with minimal interruptions and that type of thing. So I've been trying to focus on, just being grateful overall for where I am today, but also for my experiences, because going through any of the situations that we've been through really changes a person and it really determines your path moving forward. So I don't want to forget that, and I don't want to quietly, sweep it under the rug or anything like that. When I see it, if I have to just celebrate with myself, I celebrate with myself, and I'm like, you know what? I went through what I went through, and I'm pretty bad, you know what? And I celebrate that because you also don't know what your body is capable of until you go through these things, and then when you think about it, it's really quite remarkable that we can come out on the other side and be here and share our stories and stuff. So I celebrate by myself.
I remember we talked about it initially, and you're like, what date should I throw? I'm like, throw in all the dates, celebrate them all. Who cares?
I know, because
Planned surgery and stuff like that. I mean, I know I'll be coming around with a year with my last surgery,
right.
In December, and that's going to be it'll be back to like a first aortiversary in the first, but I'll have that feeling of joy of like, okay, this is, the marks a year from us readdressing what happened.
Right. And that's why I wasn't sure, because most people, one and done, and that's your hope. You hope that you never even have to go through it. But if you have to, you hope that you just have to go through it one time. And for me, it's like, no, 3 times. I want to celebrate each time,
No, exactly. I'll do it every month so that we can just celebrate me throughout the year. But
I might jump on that bandwagon if you go that route.
I don't think. First of all, I don't think anybody is going to be celebrating it that much if I'm doing it where it's monthly. Like, oh, this year Greg's got January covered. I don't think is going to go over well.
It kind of loses the nuance, after a while. So you have to keep it. You have to celebrate it when it actually occurs, But you want to keep it so that it's new and exciting every time it comes around.
Yeah. Now I'll ask a question that I asked Bill Barnhart, part of our organization and Marfan patient. It's a little different for you because of how young you were when you had that first surgery. Mm-hmm. But do you feel that the managing Marfan, the idea of managing Marfan as an illness your whole life and all that, made it a little bit easier by the time that the aorta really started to rear its head and cause you issues? Because for a lot of people, the aorta incident, the dissection may happen, or their aneurysm diagnosis might happen, and they have no experience handling anything health-wise. And now all of a sudden, it's like being thrown into a deep end as a child. But you had some sort of management of an illness, of a chronic illness, leading to the aorta. Do you think that it gave you certain skills that made your recovery and coming out of the dissection stuff easier?
I think it overall just kind of took away the fear of hospitals and procedures and that kind of thing. So I was 4 years old when I had my first surgery, and I remember that it wasn't pleasant, but I also remember that I got cookies and balloons, and I got to play in the playroom. So as sad and foreign as this may sound to some people, I associated the hospital and hospital stays with fun and love and caring and all those type of things, which most people would not associate, um, nursing staff and doctors and that kind of thing with. So I actually was very comfortable and have been very comfortable in a hospital setting. And obviously, it's largely in part because that was part of my routine growing up. But as far as the aorta, I don't think it really helped with that particular situation because, the heart surgery as a child, I never really understood it. And then as an adult, I kind of pulled the operative report and read through it and learned for myself what was actually done. But even all of that did not prepare me for the fear and that anxiety and everything that hit the way it hit. In fact, I think it may have been more detrimental because of how much I knew about the condition and how much I knew about what could the potential outcome be. I think that made it even more scarier, in fact. So I don't think that I really, having had that experience, I don't think that really made a positive contribution to my preparedness for the dissection or the upcoming surgeries or anything.
That's an interesting perspective. I never thought it that way because we always think about, for a lot of people in the community, that it's the blind side
Hmm.
of being told how serious the situation is by the doctor.
Hmm.
And suddenly you're just blindsided by that.
Right.
But when you know exactly what a dissection is, and a doctor comes back and tells you, yeah, that's what you're experiencing, that's
Yeah.
a whole different entity too when you've been trying to avoid it your whole life.
Right.
Uh, and I never really thought about that. I always thought, like, the idea of, okay, I knew this could happen would be common, but
Right.
you're right. You're still thrust into that situation.
Right.
It's a different feeling. It's not a blind side, but it's
Hmm.
still, oh my God, I can't believe we're here. This
Yeah.
happened.
At that point, it was like, shouldn't I be dead? What am I? Am I supposed to even be talking to you right now? So it's. I don't know that you're actually ever really prepared. One way or another. Unfortunately, it did. I can tell you that it definitely didn't make it any uh, less traumatic.
Good. So, what is life like now for you post these events?
Pretty
You're
boring.
back at work,
Yeah,
right?
pretty routine. I have other issues going on medically that I have to uh, continually get looked at. I have MRI every year in December um, to just kind of see where we are with the dissection, see if anything's changed, take measurements, all that good stuff. At some point, they tell me that we will be addressing the abdominal portion, um, but I don't feel that my surgical team feels really confident about doing that unless they absolutely have to, because of the issues we faced the last time when I was under. Uh, so I would assume they'd have to think of a different approach or have different folks on standby, maybe neurosurgery or something. I'm not sure, but it becomes complicated, and we they don't want to address it unless it's an absolute must. And because we're stable, we're doing well. So I do have limitations that I have to adhere to. So no lifting over 18 pounds. I am encouraged to do aerobic activity, but nothing to where I can't hold a conversation comfortably. while I'm doing said activity. And aside from that, what's going on in the world today. So it actually came, everything in my situation, the medical restrictions that I was put on, plus what's going on in the world, um, kind of combined to help create a telework opportunity for me professionally. And so I still do need to go on site once a week or so, but for the most part, I'm teleworking um, and pretty much just living a boring, happy life.
I'm sure it's not that boring. Anybody that's seen the bird and the puppy on Facebook or Instagram uh, knows that you have a very full home life. Um,
I know that
now,
I
this what?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I know that I have things coming up, so I'm trying to just enjoy this downtime or this reprieve in between things. And then, cross those bridges whenever they present themselves. So,
Right, and for a lot of people, I mean that it happens. That
mhm,
happens where you know that there's stuff on the horizon, even
right,
if it's not immediate.
right,
Like in my case, I know that I'm going to be getting readdressed. The only
right.
thing that's kind of thrown a monkey wrench into it is that these are all technically elective,
Mhm,
and with the state of things in Florida, they are shutting down to a lot of elective surgeries at this point. So it's kind of a holding pattern. But you're right, you kind of get into that. It's just over the horizon. When am I going to get there?
right.
Um, but here's the thing: if you can go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice while recovering, what would it be?
Um, I would say be patient because that is not one of my strong suits. Um, and my mom always told me as a kid, don't ask, God, the universe, whatever you believe in, don't ask for patience because you will be put in situations that, well, you want to pull your
Tested.
hair out of.
Yeah,
you know,
you're gonna specifically be tested at that point.
right, right. But I would tell myself, having gone through it, and maybe I would trust myself, coming back from the future. But I would say have patience, especially with your body, and know that you're going to get there, but it's going to take some time. And what you had done was nothing insignificant. What you had done and the trauma that your body has been through was quite large. And so you really can't compare yourself to others. You just have to be patient with yourself and your own body and go through the process and know that things eventually will be better, probably not what you were before, but at least you will be able to wash your hair again someday.
And that's great advice. And I will add that whether or not Sosa would admit it, she probably would also say, follow your PT's advice
Yes.
and do the exercises on the days that they're not in your presence,
I don't
so
think
that
that I would I don't think that I would still listen to myself. At that point I would say, "Okay, thanks for the advice." She's crazy. But it was just, it's you do the best you can.
it's tough. You're balancing a lot of stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, I have a unique perspective of I did anything that the PTs told me to do because it was so bad. I wasn't walking. I was in a chair. Then I was
Mhm.
using a walk. Like, okay, tell me what I need to do so
Yeah.
that I can get back to feeling somewhat like Greg.
Right.
Um, that. But you brought up a very good point. There's a flip side of that coin,
Yeah.
and it's that person that can be frustrated by like things are not coming easily and naturally to them. I mean, don't get
Yeah.
me wrong, I had it the frustration, but I was like what you see in movies level of
Determined.
frustration. I'll do it 14 times over, even though the doctors are like, okay, listen, your blood pressure's at this point. Stop trying to hold the fork.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's
No,
Seems right.
I would get so frustrated that my body was not doing what my mind was asking it to do, or just expecting it to do, that I shut down, and then at that point I'm like, well, if you don't want to cooperate, then we're just going to sit here and be a couch potato then until you feel like cooperating. So, yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. I was like, nope, this. And it's because of the place I was stuck in. Like,
Mhm.
nope, you know, that
Yeah.
98 days in the hospital. Nope, I want to get home now. What do you need me to do? I need to run laps. Okay,
Yeah.
we're gonna have somebody with oxygen because
Yeah.
I'll run laps around this building if I need to. Just
And
let me go home.
had it have been dependent on whether or not I left the hospital, it might have been different. But being at home, I totally was like, what do I need to do it for? What do I need to wash my hair? Why do I even care? I'm just,
I'm
and
just
that
here. I don't have no one to impress. I'm just gonna stay unshowered here.
right. And that brings up, a good point as far as like uh, experiencing some depression, even, and that kind of thing, especially at home. When the PT people did come, at least it gave me a reason to like get dressed and take a shower before they got here, and, actually engage in activities. But when they weren't here, I definitely was just like, meh, whatever. So I think it was beneficial physically, but also for my mental state, um, for the little bit of time that I did have PT. But when everybody leaves, family leaves and PT leaves, and you're home by yourself trying to, finish out your recovery, you definitely learn a lot about yourself. And you learn that you may have, what do they call that? Fully functional depression, or, those type of things. And so that's a different aspect of, traumatic events and stuff. But it's interesting, what you go through physically, but also mentally.
Right, and that's an important thing to touch upon is that there's a reason why they have a thing called cardiac depression. There's a
Mm-hmm.
reason why they literally call it that, and it invades people that have gone through surgeries like we have. It's just
Yeah.
unavoidable.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you get to. I think that's where you try to isolate what you're experiencing and how do you move forward.
Right.
Okay, you're just feeling down a little bit. That's
That's
normal.
right.
But like you said, you get into the point of I don't want to shower. I'm not getting out of the bed today. Now you're starting to creep into depression behaviors.
Right.
Um, and
Yeah.
it's something to keep an eye on.
And it's also new experiences, like if you're going through heart surgery and you've never been through it before, that's of course a scary and new experience. But then add on top of that, the psychological factor in recovery afterwards, and maybe some people don't experience that, or uh, experience such a small level of that it's not even an issue. But if you know yourself well enough, and I'm not the kind of person to stay in bed all day, you part of you wonders if this is just because your body needs the healing. But then another part of you wonders, is this you slipping into another experience that's outside the realm of physical surgery?
I think that's why I give the advice like to try to push yourself, even if it's just a smidge within reason,
Right.
each day, because then what you're feeling.
Hmm.
If you can actually like, okay, I'm going to try to tackle this today, even if you fail,
Right.
you attempted it, you're in a different mindset. Don't get me wrong, it's disheartening when something doesn't work out, but you push yourself to do it. You go
Right.
back to it the next day, you're pushing it, and you'll get there to the point where it may take 3 or 4 days, but you'll eventually get there,
Right.
you know? And
Yeah.
that's why we kind of, with some of the AH stuff, have pushed do something, get moving, do something. I don't care if it's a walk to the mailbox. It's a walk to the mailbox. You collected
Right.
your mail. Good. You
Yeah.
pushed yourself. You walked outside. You went to the mailbox.
Right. And that might seem like a small win to somebody else that hasn't gone through it, but to people who have gone through it, that's like you climbed a mountain.
Exactly. But it's building blocks. It's building blocks. It sets the first step.
Hmm.
And I think that's the most important thing. I would ask you what bit of advice you would give the community as a whole, but I think your individual advice to yourself as far as being patient with yourself in recovery really fits the bill. Unless you have any advice for people, only because you were in as a Marfan patient. I mean, a lot of people, we see way too many of people that are diagnosed with Marfan after their event. But you had the true watch and wait anxiety. So for the community that is intact aneurysm or connective tissue that might not have had any sort of event, do you have any advice how to handle the watch and wait anxiety?
I would say, don't let too much time go by before having that conversation with your medical team. Don't let the stigma of potentially seeking, um, prescription medication intervention. Don't let that deter you, because like I said, I was borderline getting there, but I kept myself from having those discussions with my medical team because I thought I can do this on my own. I don't need that. And it turned out that I didn't, but I also feel like I probably should have taken that step a little bit sooner and at least started having those discussions, and not be afraid that if I'm put on something, then that classifies me as a certain type of person or any of that. These modalities are in place to help people when they need it. It doesn't mean you always have to, um, you know, continue the medication or anything, or the therapy sessions or anything like that. But if you're in a traumatic situation in your life like that and you have those resources available to you, I would say don't wait too long to start having those discussions, and reach out to your medical team and discuss what those options are and if it's a realistic option for yourself. Um, because the anxiety, I tell you, I never ever experienced anything like that in my life, and I don't think that it was necessary, at least
And
for as long as I did it.
and you're talking about the mental health aspect of it, like for
Mhm.
your own mental health.
Right.
For people like us, that has a real detriment to what our blood pressure might read. The stress and anxiety and constantly being in that state
Yeah.
can actually be detrimental.
Right.
Um, so that's an added thing, and I think it's important that you mentioned that that there's still the stigma, and a lot of people still have a stigma or don't want to be referred to as a certain way if they go to look for an antidepressant
Right.
or anything like that. I know for me, I didn't ultimately love how they made me feel, but
Right.
I needed something that was going to treat my PTSD and the depression
Right.
for a good year after everything had happened. And then I found other coping mechanisms that worked well, and I didn't need the medication, or some
Right.
would argue that I might still need the medication. But that's the little things you'll do. You'll find the thing that calms you down, the
Right.
little tricks, the hacks, the life
Yeah.
hacks, the stuff that whether it's meditation or calming or listening to soothing sounds or
Yeah.
scents or anything like that.
And even being part of Aortic Hope, even if you're not actively participating as far as comments and that type of thing, just seeing the post and hearing other people's stories and stuff, I think for me that was a big help for sure. And just also just be mindful that your personal situation, although it may sound similar to someone else's, is still your own personal situation. And so some people might get hung up on, oh, well, this happened to Greg, so it's definitely going to happen to me, or this happened to Sosa, so that's what I'm in for. And that's not always the case. Like, let's cross bridges as we get there, and let's not create scenarios that don't really exist yet.
I agree, and I think that's what happens. I think somebody hears someone's horror story and instantaneously starts
That's
putting
not
themselves into that story,
right.
and we are all different. And I'll tell you that even for some people that we may label as had it worse, or ooh, theirs was a really bad case and stuff like that, they look at somebody else that might have had a different experience and they can't fathom that.
Right.
You
Right.
know, I I constantly look at connective tissue patients like you and wonder in my head, with the knowledge and trying to take care of all that and handling all that for years. Now they've suspected stuff with me, but I've never come back with an actual diagnosis, just probable of unknown origin,
Right.
due to other medical stuff that has happened. But I wonder if, like you had said, that definitive gave you some peace of mind, if that helps how you start addressing stuff moving forward.
Hmm. Yeah.
But you brought up a very important point. You can't read what might have been someone's individual struggle, especially if it was an emergency, and instantaneously apply it to you. It happens way too much in our community, especially unfortunately, we with aortic hope, we tend to blend all sorts of people with aortic disease. So we have a lot of people that are actively intact aneurysm people that are very involved with dissection people.
Hmm.
And I constantly try to remind them that odds are you will never get there. You're
Hmm.
never going because you're monitored and it just doesn't tend to happen. There are
Hmm.
obviously outliers and small percentages that do still have an emergency, especially in the connective tissue disorder category. But for the majority of people, you have an aneurysm, you're followed. If you're followed when and it's detected, you get to surgery time, you have surgery, now you move forward.
Right.
Uh, then there are those that had emergencies that never knew anything. So,
Right. I mean, for me, it's beneficial. It's always beneficial to hear everyone's experiences. Um, but I've learned not to apply that to my situation, but more so use that information if I'm now faced with a dissection, for instance. Now I can use that information and be like, okay, from what I remember, this could be XYZ. But even still, it could be totally different for me. But I think it's just important to have that information as kind of just knowledge, but recognize that your own experience, is going to have to be taken one step at a time as you go through it.
that's what I like about this series, and especially even the Survivor series as well, because for me it was the the individual incident was relatively minor. It was intrigued me, like what did you experience when it happened, but okay, I want to know how you felt. I want to know how you handled it. I wanted to know how you move forward. That's where I feel we are the biggest community,
Mhm.
is helping each other. How do you handle it moving forward? What's the
Right.
trick you figured out? What's how do you settle this? Okay, is it, facing depression head on? I'm going to
Mhm.
be proactive with it. Talk to my doctor. I think that's so important. Why we bring up that emotional support is needed and why we've spent so much time talking to doctors about it. It's because we want it to become commonplace
Mhm.
that that is attended to.
And it's
Uh,
actually one of the things that was recommended by my medical team, when I did approach them about, do you have patients that go through these not able to sleep nights or jolting awake in a panic, and my resting heart rate is like in the low 50s. So I would wake up and my heart would be pounding out of my chest, and I knew it wasn't normal. And one of their first responses was, find a support group. Um, so I think that they lean more towards that, and people finding commonalities with each other before, you know, scripting out meds all willy nilly and stuff. But that's also not an off the table option too if you need it. So
that's well said. And we will wrap this up. I want to thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much for joining us today, Sosa.
Thank you for having
Um,
me.
and I want to remind everybody that's watching to like and subscribe to our channel, and you'll be notified on future events and future interviews with other patients in our community. And I want to thank everyone again for joining us. Real quick before we go, we'll see if we have any comments from YouTube. Anybody watching us? And does not look like any comments. So we will wrap this up. And Sosa, thank you once again for joining us. And
Absolutely.
we'll see everybody soon.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.